Welcome to this session on affordable housing and homelessness. And I just want to preface this by saying I've been giving similar discussions at these workshops every year for a while now. And I realize I'm getting really tired of it because I'm not tired of the issue. I care a lot about it, but I'm really tired of the fact that it's getting worse and not better. And we can't seem to get the trend line to stop. So with that, I hope you will understand a little bit of my intensity if I get negative here. I apologize for that. So this is a different kind of a graphic than I usually provide, but it's something that I've been doing for Pierce County. And I thought that people around the rest of the state might be interested in it as well. One of the problems that we have, particularly among the public in general, is they don't really understand where homelessness fits into a whole spectrum of living. So on the left, you see you have people who are safe and secure in their housing. They have enough money to pay their mortgage or their rent. Typically, there's some generational wealth available. They can afford childcare and transportation. They have a support network, and almost typically, it's a majority of white people. Well, what happens when you're underemployed or you have a major disability, you lose your child care or you can't afford it anymore, or you have inadequate transportation, a lack of support network, and a lot of racial bias, you go into the at-risk category where things are kind of tenuous. And what we'll talk about in a little bit is the fact that that's where people start becoming they are paying more for their housing typically than they should be. Then what happens when somebody loses their job or has a very significant disability or illness, a major rent increase like we've been seeing over the last few years, domestic violence, criminal activity, racial bias, evictions, and so forth, then they are really on the edge and they typically move over into the homeless category, unhoused, if they can't overcome those issues. So the perceptions that people in the public have about people who are homeless is that, well, they're criminals and they're drug addicts and they're alcoholics and they're mentally ill. That is actually not the case. Almost, I would say more than half of the people who are homeless are typically working. They are underpaid or they are working part-time or something is not allowing them to generate enough money to pay rent that they can afford. What happens when somebody is homeless for a long time, however, is that that's when they begin kind of self-medicating or they become mentally ill. And that isn't to say that everybody came in healthy, but just that it's more intense that way. People move into the chronically unhoused category, and they really need government support to not only get housing, but also to get the services that they need to be able to function in a real life. And I'm hoping that this graphic is somewhat helpful to you. At the bottom, I don't think you can really see it, but the categories at risk and in peril are the places where we need to do prevention. And the categories in the homeless and chronically unhoused are the places where we have what we call the homelessness response system. The homelessness response system is almost entirely what is funded by government. And so we're not doing prevention to keep people housed as much as we're spending a lot of money on services after they're unhoused. So it's a national problem. And this is an example. This is a number of categories that all across the country. I left off the key and I can't remember it either. But basically, these are upward trends here in the last couple of years, and it's continued to go up in 2024. One of the problems that we have in the homelessness category as an issue is that our data collection systems are not good. A lot of this is based on what we call the point in time count. And many of you, if you've been involved in this issue locally, you know that that's a one time a year count in January of people who are identified as being unhoused. Now, in this particular case, these are the people who are in shelters. That is actually less than half of the people who are homeless. And the Housing and Urban Development had a requirement until just this year that a survey, the point in time count, be done annually. And now they've moved to biennially. So they're asking for a count of people in the shelters, but not necessarily a count every year of the people who are not in shelters. So we will have less than a full view from now on of what the actual count of people are who are unhoused. Additionally, as we're finding in my local league area, um, the number of people who get identified has a lot to do with how many volunteers are willing to go out and do the work. So again, it's not necessarily representative of the true count of people who are homeless. It's a true count of who was identified by the number of volunteers that we have. That said, the trend lines are still important. The trend lines are still representative of what's happening in this world of people who are unhoused. So now in Washington State, first of all, yeah, this data back here came from the HUD annual assessment. This data is from the Department of Commerce about Washington State. And basically, it's saying that it's again relating to the sheltered part of the population. The increase over the last year is ranging between 4 and 7%, with an average of 5% increase. Well, 5% increase on a big base is still quite a bit, and any increase at all right now is traumatic. And then the unsheltered homeless, King County does not do that and did not do that, and the rest of the state is required to do it. And so again, we have a little bit of a data flaw here, but the numbers of people who are considered unhoused is 16,000 unsheltered plus 14,000 or 15,000 sheltered. So we're talking 30,000 people in the state of Washington. And that's an undercount. So here what you see is combination of sheltered and unsheltered. So people in emergency shelters from 2022 to 2024, and this is Department of Commerce, increased by almost 20%. The people who are unsheltered increased more than that. And then the people who are in what we call transitional housing have also increased, but not by a lot. So what we have here is an indication, and here's the 31,000 that I was estimating earlier. We have an increase, particularly in the people who have no shelter, and that's the most worrisome of all. This is HUD data related to Washington State. And what we have here is 35% of our extremely low income renter households. These are people who are called in that other chart in peril. 35% are in the labor force. They're working. 22% are disabled. 30% are seniors. And then the other categories, people in school, the yellow bar are the yellow wedge is people in school, 5%, and then 7% is just another whole category. So when you consider that seniors are on fixed incomes, but rents are rising, you consider that 35% of the people at extremely low income are working, but unable to pay. They're really in jeopardy. And then 22% are disabled. That means we have a lot of people at risk in the lower income categories. Then we have how many houses or home housing units are available at different income levels. So at 100% of average median income in the state of Washington, there's almost enough affordable housing, 99 for every 100 people. Then you go down to 80%, it drops a little bit. When you go down to 50% of area median income, it goes to less than half. And then at extremely low income, it goes to 28 out of every 100 who need housing. So you can see what the problem is. We have to have housing, and we're just not able to provide it right now. Now, the term I was trying to come up with a minute ago is cost burden. Cost burden means that you're paying more than 30% of your income for housing. And so at extremely low income on the left here, 85% of the people who are extremely low income are cost burden. They're paying more than 30%. 75% are severely cost burden, meaning they're paying more than 50% of their income for housing. Now, if you think about all the other costs that people have, when you have to buy food, you have to pay for healthcare, you have to pay for your car or whatever transportation you need, clothing, school supplies, et cetera, and so forth. And then you also figure that people at the extremely low income level are paying 18% or 17% of their income in state and local taxes. This is really bad. So this is the problem that we're facing: how to get housing for people who just don't have the money. And you can see from the graph that the severely cost burden, the people paying over 50% of their income, it drops significantly as the income levels get higher. But the people paying more than 30% of their income is also dropping, but not nearly as significantly. So in the middle income category across the state of Washington, 23% of the people at middle income are still paying more than 30% of their income in housing costs. So populations at risk. This is 2020 was where the graph really took a turn for the worst. These are the severely cost burden households. It went up a lot right at the pandemic. It made a major turn. Now, the other number down here is at the end of the last recession. So things are not getting better for these people. It's also true that most of the people, or I will not say most, disproportionate number of people who are in the lower income levels and who are cost burden are also not white. So that is because white households have a lot more net worth than other groups do. So this is an average household by race, net worth. White people's net worth, and this is an average, is 1.3 million. Other categories than Black and Hispanic, the average household net worth is about $900,000. Now, this includes assets, a house, other kinds of resources that people have, all combined together. For African Americans, the amount of net worth is closer to $341,000, and then Hispanic are even lower than that. So this is one of the reasons why people who become at peril and then become homeless are more likely to be Black or Hispanic, particularly Black, than white people are. And so the disproportionality is in the homeless population, it's like 4 times as many people relative to the general population who are Black than white. Black households also have the largest share of their liabilities in consumer credit. Now, this is something that, as we all know, if it gets out of control, it can kill you financially. So what we have is in the Black category, home mortgages are low, but the consumer debt is quite a bit high relative to the other kinds of relative to the home mortgage. Hispanic, it's a little lower. In the white category, the consumer credit is quite a bit less proportionate to the other, excuse me, the home mortgage cost. And then other is even better. So again, we have a combination of lack of assets with racism that also it feeds into the employment, it feeds into rental capacity, eviction notices, and all kinds of things that really compound for the Black population. And in this case, this is the rate of people who are, I can't see my own title there. These are ethnic groups and their relative proportions of homeless population and relative to their population at large. So Black and African Americans are like 12% of the population or less, and they represent 48.2% of the homeless population. So I don't need to belabor this point, but I think that we need to be very aware that solutions may need to be different for people who are of color than for white people. Keep getting this thing in my way here. So this is the share of people living unsheltered back in 2022, but the numbers haven't changed a lot. Down the middle is the overall population average. And so what you see is people who are having gender issues, people who are Indigenous, Asian. Oops, I might have got this backwards. Anyway, these are, you can see that there's a huge disproportionality for certain subgroups. I apologize for my lack of explaining that. So now how have they been shifting since 2015? What you see is that the transgender population has increased quite a bit in terms of being unsheltered relative to the population at large in that category. Now, they already were large, but it's even gotten bigger. And then what we have is the Hispanic category also increased, and the Black category has not increased, but it already was huge. And then the Asian or African American, Asian or Islander category has increased. So we also know, and this is data from the Department of Revenue, that seniors are the fastest growing unhoused population category. So again, it relates to the inability of somebody on a fixed income to pay increasing rates of rent or dealing with mortgages that are increasing. So this is another thing to be concerned about, because addressing the capacity of a senior in that situation versus a person who's working, those solutions would be quite different. So what do we do about homelessness? A lot of people would say, and I believe personally, this is not a league position, that housing should be a human right. But certainly helping people get housing is humane. And how do we provide housing? The first thing we need to do is prevent people from losing their housing. And then the second thing we need to do is to subsidize housing for the lowest income people who can never pay the full cost of rent in the market. And then for people with long-term needs, supportive housing is the category where there are life skills and counseling and that case management that goes along with the housing as part of it. More supportive housing is necessary in that group. And then finally, if we could help people get ahead with their education, their training, and get higher wages, this could actually help with the housing situation because more people could afford what housing is available. So this is blurry, and I apologize. This is another piece of that chart I showed you at the beginning. and ignore this piece over here because I don't have the part that goes with it. But preventive strategies are providing rental assistance when people are on the margin, preventing eviction so that people can stay in their homes, creating training and employment programs to help people raise their wages and their salaries so they can earn more, providing food and utility assistance and financial assistance. The data says that when somebody becomes unhoused, it is way more expensive to deal with them than if they stay in their homes. So these programs that cost money are actually cheaper than what happens when somebody becomes unhoused. When somebody becomes unhoused, they're dealing with the legal system, they're dealing with going to emergency rooms instead of primary care for their medical treatment. They're dealing with all kinds of other issues like brutality. They're dealing with being swept, the things that really happen to people out on the street that end up costing a lot more money than providing some support to keep them in their houses in the first place. So when we turn to gaps in the system, the biggest one is access to affordable housing. But other kinds of gaps, and I'm just going to kind of read a few of these because I know you can't really, they're blurry. You can't really see it very well. But number one, next biggest problem is that the funding sources are vulnerable because they depend on regressive revenue sources. So in the revenue piece that I did earlier in the breakout session, we talked about how any change to the basic tax structure for the state of Washington, which is primarily sales tax and property tax, any attempts to increase those affects the people that need the service the most. So it's kind of contraindicated to do that. So we need some new progressive sources of revenue that make the people at the higher income levels pay more so that people at the lower income levels can have their needs met. In terms of system issues, we have every county, I think, has some kind of coordinated entry system that allows people to check in, get on a register of homeless people, and get case management. Access to that is typically limited. We don't have enough housing for people who are employed, but also unhoused. We don't have enough shelter facilities around the state. Nobody does. We don't have enough rental assistance. The list goes on. We don't have enough access to behavioral health and substance use disorder treatment, access to health care. I don't know how many of you know, but there are a lot of free clinics, something like 59 or 60 free clinics around the state of Washington who provide health care at no cost to people who are unhoused and people who are immigrants who aren't in the system for regular health care. And they do that by donations of labor from doctors and nurses who give their time for free. And then other donations pay for the cost of doing business. But that just seems kind of, in my humble personal opinion, unconscionable as well. And they don't receive any state support either. So this is a whole list of stuff that we really need to do to make the response system better and the prevention system better. So the challenges that we have right now is the shortage of housing units in total, basically. We have a vacancy rate statewide of 3.7%, and the experts say that 7% vacancy rate is about the right balance for keeping the price. You know, when you have supply and demand and it affects the price, it keeps the price lower because there's more supply and not all taken. So when you have such a short, small vacancy rate, it jacks up the price. Just that's how the economic system works. And then, as I've just pointed out, many people have incomes that are way too low, even for market rate housing. And so we saw the graphs of the people who are cost burdened and severely cost burdened, and they just can't afford it. The Department of Commerce has recommended that to solve this problem, we need 55,000 new units of housing in the state of Washington every year. And that is just simply not happening, and most people think it's not feasible, but that's what we need. So another challenge is that we don't have enough behavioral health support in the healthcare and behavioral health breakout room. They'll be talking about how there's been a lot of work done in the last couple of years to put more money into behavioral health, but part of that is going to training people from scratch to be behavioral health practitioners. And so there still is a shortage, and that is affecting the ability of people who need the service to retain their health or regain their health and to stay housed or get housing. Then we have a real problem with siting shelters and affordable housing and behavioral health facilities. All three of those categories are often NIMBY issues. And then in addition to that, the cost of permitting, the cost of all the different kinds of processes that have to be used for siting facilities is often a deterrent to getting those to happen when they're government subsidized or when a private nonprofit tries to produce them and just doesn't have the resources. Then we have a huge gap in the youth and young adult systems. A lot of people who are homeless as a young person become homeless later as adults, much higher rate than people who never were homeless. And so what we have is people coming out of the juvenile justice system or foster care who aren't prepared and don't have any support systems, and they have a higher rate of becoming homeless. And then that's the same population that returns to homelessness later. So we need a lot of special attention given to young people who are particularly affected by dysfunctional other systems that they've been in. So in recent years, there's been a lot of work by the legislature. And so in terms of funding, a lot of support for local governments to get money that they need to do things with affordable housing. The problem is that local governments are already strapped, particularly counties. And so this is a drop in the bucket for local governments, and they don't have anything to supplement these with to actually make up the amount of money that's necessary, particularly to create new housing. They've also changed some of the laws related to density and tiny house communities and so forth in order to make it more feasible, taking away some of the local government restrictions on how density can be applied. And if you have more density, you have lower cost in development and lower future costs too, as well, transportation, for example. So they've done a lot in that regard in the last couple of years. And then the latest one was comprehensive planning requirements to add, well, essentially what it is to create an expectation in their comprehensive plans that local jurisdictions will have a way to develop at the rate they need to address their growing populations. Now, the Puget Sound area comprehensive plans are due at the end of this month, and many of them have not really done that. And the rest of the state is due next year. And my guess is they're going to struggle with this too. But these are all policy choices that the legislature is making to try and make local governments more responsive to the need and have the resources to actually create more housing. We've also done a lot with tenant protections. So particularly in the category of manufactured and mobile home owners who rent the land underneath their facilities or their homes. A lot of work had to be done there because a lot of the mobile home and manufactured home sites are being bought up for investment purposes. And then the rents are being jacked up I met with the Manufactured Home Owners Association a couple months ago, and they were telling stories like the rent underneath their mobile home was equivalent to the rent it would cost to have just a regular one-bedroom apartment in that same community. So that really makes no sense. And so that's the reason why the legislature has focused a lot on that particular population, which is extraordinarily vulnerable to being evicted. They've increased the notice that people can have or have to have in order to either move or adjust their budgets. And they've increased protection for foreclosures. They've given legal support and so forth. So the legislature has really been working on this issue, but none of it is quite adding up to enough to get us more housing. They've also done more for vulnerable populations. So the Apple Health and Homes program is one that it says that when somebody comes out of a hospital, they have to go to housing. They cannot be put back on the street if they still need support. So that was a big ticket item. Um, they were working on the juvenile issue, and Covenant Act was a way to support African Americans who previously experienced redlining effects, helping them get more home ownership and so forth. So there are a lot of programs that the legislature has supported in the last couple of years. Now, that takes us to now. And now it feels like, given the revenue conditions, that we're going to have very little impact coming. But the one thing that the legislature could do that, and Nancy Shapiro referred to this in the morning, they could pass the rent stabilization bill. When you have people getting rent increases of $6 or $8 or $1,000, $100 or $1,000 a month overnight, they can't afford that. There's no way anybody could deal with that. So creating a policy that says, other than in certain specific circumstances, the rent could only increase 7% a year would be very stabilizing. The original concept was 5%, but the 7% was negotiated. Even at that, it wasn't passed either of the last 2 years. So this is something we'll be working on as a priority for this coming year. Another issue is capital funding, investment in the Housing Trust Fund. Housing Trust Fund is a state program that basically allows low interest or no interest loans or grants to private nonprofits who want to develop affordable housing. Now, a few years ago, they started at 150 million, another 150, and then 200, and now the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance is proposing 500 million. The problem with that is there's no way to fund that in the current tax crisis that we're dealing with. But that's something that people feel like it's important to keep making that point, that we need this in order to keep the momentum going. There also was an account created in the capital budget. Excuse me, I've got a text from one of our providers. I have to ask for 5 more minutes. Sorry. So the idea was to put more money again into the housing repair fund, and that would be in the category of prevention to the extent that the houses can be repaired. It allows people to stay in their homes longer, and then prevent cuts to homeless services. So the document recording fee is one of the opportunities that local governments had to, and the state as well, different components of it, to pay for affordable housing services and homeless services. And the intention here is to add to that because the recording fee is experiencing a greater shortfall than some of the other funds. And again, I don't know where the revenue is going to come from, but these are things that are being proposed as a way of keeping the legislature's eyes on the ultimate goal, which is more housing. And then reducing the criminalization. We still have a lot of people being swept and arrested for not moving or being in the wrong place and that kind of thing. And people who are out on the street are generally not there because they want to be and typically have no place to go. So that's another category of work that the legislature would be asked to deal with. And then the right to counsel. So all of that points to we need more progressive revenue. And Nancy talked about that a little bit. We need revenue that will come from people with higher income and go to the state and not jeopardize people at the lowest income levels. So basically, our position is that uh, the federal government and other levels of government have equal responsibility to provide education, employment, and housing. And so that's a pretty strong statement. And then all levels of government, the state position, all levels of government and the private sector share responsibility to help alleviate the housing shortage in the low-income sector. And it goes on from there. So we have a basis in our league positions to really take action on this. And basically this is the guidance that I'm getting when I lobby in the state legislature. Now, for all of you, I've kind of droned on a long time. I want to take a little bit of time to answer your questions, but I am hoping that you will watch the legislative newsletter and help testify or sign in pro and con on the bills that we do finally get, and particularly the budget, and support our lobby team that way. And I'm hoping that you will look at your local comprehensive plan and see what they are doing about assuring that the housing shortage will be addressed. And then I'm hoping that you will also be out in your communities, if you're not already, just generally educating about what this crisis really is and not something that people are wrongly assuming that it is. So I'm going to stop there, and I do apologize. I droned on quite a while. So I think we have 4 more minutes or something like that. Want to see what questions you have or comments. Chuck, I see you. You can go
Yes.
first, but
So, yes, comment, if you will, on the Supreme Court decisions relative to Grants Pass. What's the
um,
implications?
hold on a second. I wanted to say, other than you who I saw, could you all use your electronic hand function to raise your hand because I can't see most of you. Now, Chuck, could you repeat that, please?
Okay, the Supreme Court acted on the Grants Pass decision. Can you comment on that as to how that affects us in the state?
Yeah, the Grants Pass case, for those who haven't heard of it, is a case that, let me start in a different place. There was a case called Martin v. Boise. Martin v. Boise said um, that you cannot make somebody move off of a public space if you can't provide them with a place to go for shelter. And if they're camping or sitting in a public space, they are entitled to have a place to sleep. The Grants Pass came along just much more recently, and the Supreme Court said that it's okay to move people off of public property if they're just sitting there or sleeping there. And it completely reversed the outlook for people who are unhoused and have to sleep on the street or in a park or someplace like that. So looks like we have a minute left. So the outcome of that is that a lot more jurisdictions are doing what we call sweeping. They are moving people who are in public places around. And what typically happens is because those people have no place to go, they just move a few blocks and set up camp there. Then it happens again. They get swept again and they get moved somewhere else. Number one, that's expensive. for the government to do. Number two, it doesn't really have any long-term effect. Number three, it's demeaning and inappropriate criminalization of people who can't help it. So that's the effect of the Grants Pass case, and it's really brutal. Other questions? Well, I must have put you all to sleep, and I apologize for that. Thank you for being interested in this.